It began like any other Tuesday morning, cool air, a golden sky over Charleston, and the distant sound of traffic weaving past the federal courthouse. At precisely 8:07 a.m., a woman approached the front steps. Her gait was measured, slow but unwavering, each step echoing with quiet authority against the concrete. Her silver hair shimmered in the sun, pulled back neatly into a coiled bun that reflected years of discipline and dignity. Judge Marlene Beauregard wasn't one to make grand entrances. Her navy blue blazer was well worn, but pressed with care. She carried a scuffed leather portfolio, nothing flashy, just practical like her. Around her neck, just barely visible beneath her collar, hung a chain with two dull military dog tags. She had never removed them since her last combat tour. At 70 years old, Marlene bore herself like someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. Her spine had the faint curve of age and old service wounds, but her eyes were sharp, clear, focused. She didn't wear her judicial robe outside. The courtroom never had. It wasn't modesty. It was precision. That robe was for the bench. The rest of the time, she observed, just like she was taught in Vietnam. She moved with calm purpose through the outer security line, nodding politely to clerks who didn't recognize her, or perhaps chose not to. She'd been through it before. Being invisible came with the skin she was born in and the hair that had gone silver over decades of loyalty. At the metal detectors, a voice interrupted the stillness. "Ma'am," came the sharp bark. "Step aside." Deputy Marshal Travis Stone, a towering man with forearms like tree trunks and a perpetually clenched jaw, motioned with a flick of his chin. Marlene turned calmly. "Is there an issue, Deputy?" Stone didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned her silver twists, no makeup, sturdy flats, a leather bag. He saw no visible ID, no robe, no reason to pause. Just another elderly black woman with nowhere urgent to be. "No badge displayed," he said finally. "You can't just waltz into a federal building like this." Without a word, Marlene reached into her blazer and retrieved her federal credentials. The metal badge gleamed under the detector's light. Stone took it, barely glanced, and then slid it into his pocket. "I'll need that returned," she said, voice firm but soft military tone, the kind that made soldiers listen without realizing. "Were you off to in such a rush, Grandma?" he sneered. The word landed like a slap. Another female officer, standing nearby, shifted uneasily, but said nothing. "I'm heading to a courtroom," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "Then follow my procedure," he said. "Includes random checks. Let's go." With a heavy palm, he gripped her upper arm and guided her toward a side screening room, no windows, just fluorescent lighting, a steel chair, and a cold hum from electronic scanners. She froze in the doorway. "I do not consent to this," she said clearly. "You have no legal basis to detain me." "You're acting suspicious," Stone replied, gesturing to the chair. "That's cause enough." When she didn't sit, two other officers entered. One took her wrist, the other steadied the chair. "This is a violation." "I want names," Marlene said, her voice climbing. Stone didn't answer. Instead, he picked up electric clippers. "Could be hiding something in that silver mop," he muttered. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Standard protocol," he said. Without warning, the buzzing began. The cold metal touched her scalp, and within seconds, thick silver strands began falling. One by one, Marlene sat frozen, her body still. Years of service had taught her how to endure humiliation without flinching. She didn't cry, didn't yell. She watched her hair fall like ashes onto the linoleum floor. Her dignity stripped again by enemy hands, but by her own country's guardians. "You should have shown some respect," Stone said, brushing stray hairs from his sleeve like she was debris. Her voice, when it returned, was steel. "You'll regret this." He scoffed. "People like you always say that." He shoved her badge back in her palm and gestured toward the hallway. "Courtroom's that way." She left without another word. But something far stronger than anger boiled beneath her ribs' purpose. The same force that carried her through war zones, law school at 53, and confirmation hearings at 65. The corridors were quiet. Too quiet. Clerks averted their eyes as she passed. They knew, but none spoke. She arrived outside courtroom 3, paused to inhale like she had before parachute drops and enemy fire. Then she pushed the double doors wide. Conversations died instantly. Dozens of heads turned. Journalists, lawyers, defendants, plaintiffs. They all watched as the woman with uneven hair, dressed plainly, marched toward the judge's bench. It wasn't until she pulled the black robe from the chair and began sliding her arms through the sleeves that reality sank in. The woman they'd seen humiliated just moments ago wasn't a bystander. She was the judge, and this was her courtroom. Marlene turned, the robe draped over her shoulders like an old field jacket. "Is the docket ready?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk answered, voice cracking. "We begin with preliminary testimony on Case 4120, A, United States v. Charleston Police Department." Murmurs rippled through the benches. Charges included excessive force, abuse of power, civil rights violations. The usual. But nothing about this morning felt usual anymore. The first witness was called, an officer accused of breaking an elderly man's ribs during a peaceful protest. Marlene listened silently, pen moving across a notepad. No interruptions, no questions, but her presence alone unsettled the room, especially one man, Stone. She saw him shifting nervously in the back. He looked like he wanted to vanish. She made sure he didn't. After the second witness, she declared a recess. The room emptied, all except her clerk, 2 security officers, and Deputy Stone. "Deputy Stone," she said without looking up. He stopped mid-step. "Yes, Your Honor." "Step forward." He did, like a man marching toward judgment. "State your full name." "Travis Stone." "And how long have you worked as a deputy marshal?" 14 years. "How many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" she asked, tapping her pen against her notepad. He flinched. "Your Honor, I didn't know who you were." "That's not what I asked." He searched the room for rescue. None came. "How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy?" "2 don't know." 14, she said. 12 of them formal. All buried. All dismissed. You're protected by procedure and policy. His voice trembled. "I didn't know you were." "And that's the problem," she said coldly. "You saw a black woman, elderly, without a robe, and decided she was nothing. You decided humiliation was acceptable." She turned to the 2 officers by the door. "Take him into custody. Formal charges to follow." "You can't do this," he shouted, but the cuffs were already on. Later that morning, as the next witness approached, a young intern named Lila hesitated near the bench. "I saw what happened," she whispered. "I was scared. I should have said something." Marlene looked at her hands. They were shaking. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "That matters." "I didn't stop it." "No," Marlene said. "But you're speaking now. That's more than most." Testimony continued. A father described how his teenage son lay bleeding while officers laughed. Marlene listened, silent. When he finished, he asked, "Does it even matter what I say?" "Yes," she said. "It matters now. You've been heard." That night, she sat in her chambers, studying her reflection. Her scalp was patchy, raw, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. It had intensified. The next morning, the atmosphere had changed. The courtroom was full. Reporters, civil rights lawyers, students, activists. The whole city seemed to hold its breath. Before the first witness, a defense attorney stood. "Your Honor, we move to declare mistrial based on recent developments." "You mean the assault," she said evenly, "and the arrest of a court officer?" "Yes, Your Honor." "These events raise questions of impartiality." Marlene stood slowly. "You believe that because I was publicly assaulted for being who I am, I cannot be fair?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You're wrong," she said. "I conducted this trial by the book. I have followed every protocol, every rule, every standard." She walked to the front of the bench. "What you fear is not bias. It's justice. And if my presence here makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you've grown too comfortable with injustice." The courtroom was silent. That afternoon, a former court clerk named Denise took the stand and revealed years of ignored complaints against Stone, all buried with judicial consent. She named names, presented memos. The gallery erupted. On the final day, with rain battering the windows, Marlene entered the courtroom in silence. She paused at the bench. Then, in a single fluid motion, removed her robe, folded it, laid it on her chair. I have sat behind this bench with pride, but I've also stayed silent for too long. She faced the crowd. This court finds Deputy Travis Stone guilty of abuse of power, civil rights violations, and official misconduct. But that isn't where it ends. She lifted a folder from beneath her seat. This is the Beauregard mandate. Effective immediately. She outlined mandatory anti-bias training, psychological screening, performance audits, and zero-tolerance policies across every courthouse in the jurisdiction. I will take this to the circuit, to Washington, because what happened to me cannot happen again. The side door opened. Stone entered in cuffs, no longer in uniform. You spent your career deciding who was worthy of dignity, Marlene said. But today, dignity has decided your fate. She nodded to the bailiffs. Take him away. Months later, Judge Marlene Beauregard stood before a group of middle school students. A girl raised her hand. Do you still believe in the system? She asked. Marlene paused, smiled softly. I don't believe in what the system was, but I believe in what it can become. And with that, the silver began to shine again.